Hello, in this tutorial we are going to learn how to use mDNS and the WebSerial library on the ESP32. As target board I'm going to be using a Firebeetle board from DFRobot. So if you have covered my previous tutorials about WebSerial, you know that I've mentioned that this is a very useful solution for when we want to debug and we don't want to have a physical connection or a USB cable connected between a computer and the ESP32. Still, this library allows us to interact with the device, either receiving messages, sending messages, or wherever we want over the web, in a very similar way to how we work with the serial interface in Arduino. So for those who are familiar with Arduino worlds, it will be very easy to use this WebSerial solution. Nonetheless, if you notice, I also mentioned that although we were using this solution, we were always opening a serial connection at the beginning of our code of the setup function, either when we were connecting to a Wi-Fi network or using the ESP32 as soft access point. And the reason was that we needed to know what was the IP address of the ESP32, so a computer on that same network could reach it and then obtain the interface of WebSerial and establish those connections. I also mentioned that one of the possible solutions would be using mDNS to perform the resolution of a name into an IP address, and then in that way we just needed to know a fixed name that we define, and we don't care what is the IP address that is assigned to the ESP32. We just need to type that address. It will be resolved for us under the hood, and we'll be able to reach the WebSerial interface. And so we are in this tutorial, so I'm going to cover connecting mDNS and WebSerial, but before that a brief explanation about mDNS. I've already covered in previous tutorials. I'll leave some links in the description, but basically mDNS is a protocol that allows to do the resolution of locally defined names in a local network without the necessity to have a dedicated infrastructure. So basically our computer will be able to figure out what is the IP address of the ESP32 after we type in a domain that needs obviously to be translated to IP address. So this is a very simple protocol that will operate and will allow us to work without, like I said, the dedicated infrastructure, and is very useful for this kind of situations where we want to deploy something in a network and we don't want to know beforehand the IP address of the device. So, but enough with the talk, let's jump right to the code. So the first thing we'll do is the library includes, as usual, Wi-Fi.h for connecting the ESP32 to a Wi-Fi network, and just a parenthesis. So in this tutorial, I'm assuming that the ESP32 is connected to the Wi-Fi network hosted by a router. Obviously, this should also work when the ESP32 is acting as a soft access point, but basically, we are going to cover here a situation where we are connecting to a Wi-Fi network hosted by a router. Besides the Wi-Fi.h, we need the ESP async web server because the WebSerial uses a sync HTTP web server instance under the hood. Obviously, the WebSerial.h library, and then this new library ESP mDNS.h, which comes by default with Arduino Core. You don't need to install any additional library. This is something that once you install the Arduino Core, you should have access to this library. Then, as usual, if we want to connect to a Wi-Fi network, we need to provide its credentials, namely the SSID and password, and here I'm using placeholders. In your case, you should place the credentials of your actual Wi-Fi network. Then, creating an instance of the sync web server class, passing as input of the constructor the port where the HTTP server will be listening to incoming requests. As usual, I'm using port 80, which is the default HTTP port. Now let's jump to the setup, and probably here you are going to see something different from pretty much all my tutorials, which is I'm not opening a serial connection, and that's precisely because we don't want to rely on a serial connection. Obviously, and again just doing here a parenthesis, there are things that can go wrong when we are connecting to Wi-Fi, when we are initializing mDNS, and in a real application, if you don't have a physical serial interface to print this, you need to somehow, or I recommend you to somehow treat these error situations, and you can, for example, log them to a file, save them in memory when later you can reach the device. For example, if you have a custom board, just turn on a LED indicating that something went wrong. So There are multiple ways of handling these errors. It depends on your use case or what you have available. Here, for simplicity, I'm not doing anything, but please keep in mind that in a real application, you should be careful, you should treat errors, you should have a way of reacting to them. Okay, so going back to the code, connecting to the Wi-Fi network, as usual, is calling the begin method on the Wi-Fi extern variable, passing as input the network credentials, and then for simplicity here we are looping, waiting for the status of the connection to be equal to connected. Again, if something goes wrong, if we mess the credentials, if the network is down, keep in mind that this will be an infinite loop, so we are simplifying here for illustration purposes. In a real application, please be careful with this step so you don't get yourself in an infinite loop. Then, after we are connecting to Wi-Fi, we are going to take care of the mDNS related part. So we also have here an external object called mDNS that becomes available when we import the mDNS library. And then we just need to call the begin method here, passing as input the name that we want to assign to our ESP32. So ESP32 will be the local domain name that we need to type when we want to reach the ESP32, our device, and under the hood, the mDNS protocol and the devices that are talking will take care of translating this name into an IP address that then is used to establish the communication. Obviously, this begin method takes care of initializing all the interfaces related with mDNS. It's the good part about using the Arduino core. All of this is handled for us under the hood. Of course, that if you are curious about what happens below, which methods are called or which functions from IDF are called, you can always go to the Arduino core GitHub page, just search for this method and this library, and you should see what is happening. Just another note, this method returns a boolean indicating if this procedure was successful or not. In case it is true, everything went fine. In case it is false, it means something went wrong. Again, for simplicity, if something goes wrong, we are just returning. Obviously, we won't have any way to tell because we are just returning. We don't know if things are working or not. Again, it's just for simplicity. I am being optimistic, assuming everything works. Please don't forget to take care of the errors in a real scenario. Moving on is what we have been doing in the previous two tutorials. We are calling the begin method on our WebSerial object, passing as input the address of our HTTP server object, and then starting our server so it with a call to the begin method, so it starts listening to incoming requests. The main loop, like before, we are printing this hello world message. Feel free to print wherever you want. I'm doing this every second. You can use other periodicity, just play around with it and see what happens, but you should be able to change this however you want. I already uploaded this code to my device. I don't have the Arduino serial monitor open. Obviously, I don't need it because I'm not using serial. Now let's open here my browser. I've already typed here the address. Keep in mind that although the domain name that we define is ESP32, then when we are on the browser we need to add this .local afterwards, because this is how these mDNS addresses are specified. So don't forget, so ESP32 or wherever you wanted to assign as domain name of the ESP32, you can call it wherever you want, but don't forget to put this .local afterwards. Then, regarding the relative path, is like before, /WebSerial. Let me just refresh. It might take a bit. Okay, as you can see, it just reset, and now we are receiving the hello world messages as expected. Okay, so as you can see, this is very simple. Obviously, it's when we start seeing the importance of individual things we learn. So for example, mDNS, when we learn about it at first glimpse, it may not seem super useful, but then when we try to develop an application, we start eating these things like, okay, now I need to know the IP address, how can I solve that? Maybe I can put together the knowledge I have about WebSerial with mDNS, and now I have a very nice solution where I don't need to know the IP address. Maybe tomorrow I don't have access to a Wi-Fi network, so I just put also the soft AP solution, and now I have something that works without having to know the IP address, and in a network hosted by the ESP32, and so on. So that's how we then, from the building blocks we learn, we start building bigger applications. Regarding mDNS, let me just do here a final note about it. In order for your computer to be able to do the resolution of this address, it also needs to support mDNS, okay? In tutorials that I've done in the past, I have some people mentioning that they could not, or the tutorial didn't seem to be working for them, and the reason is most likely because your computer doesn't support the resolution of mDNS addresses. In my case, I'm on Windows 8.1. I've done this a long time ago, but I had to install a service from, I think it was from Apple, called Bonjour. It was like an application for printers or something like that, but it was at the time the only way I found, and after searching a lot on the web, to enable the support of mDNS here for Windows 8 at the time. I don't know if in the meantime, because I did not uninstall it, so I still have it available, so I don't know in the meantime if support was added, if you still need to install this program, or if you have other solutions available. Also in newer versions of Windows, maybe there's already built-in support. I know that in Linux there's also a solution. I don't recall the name by heart, but if you do a quick search about mDNS, you should find it. So keep in mind that depending on your operating system, you may need to install support to mDNS. Okay, I did not cover all the use cases, so I don't know all the details of every operating system, but please consider this if you follow this tutorial and you are not being able to reach the server, you are not being able to obtain this page after you follow all these steps. Please make sure to investigate a bit and see what you need to do on your operating system side. Okay, so that's all. Thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.